The crystal chandelier above me glimmered, scattering soft light across the ballroom, but my eyes kept drifting to the faint reflection of my face in the glass. No matter how perfectly my hair curled down my shoulders, no matter how sleek the silk of my navy blouse felt against my skin, my gaze always snagged on the same place, my scars. I adjusted my sleeve, letting the fabric fall lower across my wrist, though I hated myself a little each time I did it. Old habits die hard. From the outside, I'm sure I looked composed, successful, even. The tall windows of the hotel overlooked the city skyline, and I stood there with a glass of champagne in hand, the very picture of a woman who had it all together. But appearances are funny things. They hide the parts of us we'd rather no one notice. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A message lit up the screen, dragging me back to a place I'd buried deep. Family dinner this weekend. Everyone will be there. You too, right? The knot in my stomach tightened. I hadn't sat in the same room with them in years. Not since the night they laughed at me, turning my scars into a joke. Not since my sister's voice cut through the crowd like a knife. Hide that before the kids see. And just like that, the past I'd worked so hard to escape came knocking again. I was 22 the night it happened. Young enough to still crave my parents' approval, old enough to know I would probably never get it. The party was at our family home in Denver. My parents' idea of a small gathering, which still meant 40 people spilling out of the living room, the scent of wine and smoked meats clinging to the air. I remember smoothing down the skirt of my dress, wishing it had longer sleeves, wishing I had been born in a body untouched by the fire that had changed me at 15. For most of the evening, I stayed quiet, clutching a glass of sparkling water, listening more than speaking. I thought maybe if I stayed in the background, no one would notice the faint red lines climbing up my arm, peeking out when my bracelet slipped. But of course, someone always noticed. "Lord, Emily," my father said, chuckling loud enough for half the room to hear. "Couldn't you cover that up tonight? You'll scare the guests." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in intention. At least, that's what I told myself. But it felt cruel all the same. Each chuckle echoed against my ribs like a hammer. And then came my sister, Madison, glass of Chardonnay in hand, voice sharp as broken glass. "Seriously, Em. Hide that before the kids see. They'll have nightmares." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. My cheeks burned hotter than any flame I'd survived. I wanted to disappear into the floorboards, but instead I managed a brittle smile, the kind you wear when holding back tears. My hands shook so badly, I set my glass down before I dropped it. I excused myself, mumbling something about the bathroom, but really I bolted outside, into the cold night air. That's when I remembered my grandmother's words. She had pressed a silver locket into my palm years earlier, whispering, "Beauty fades, child. Strength does not. Carry this when the world forgets what you're made of." That night, I clutched the locket, so hard it left an imprint on my skin. Standing under the porch light, I realized I had a choice: keep shrinking until there was nothing left of me, or walk away and build a life where no one would ever tell me to hide again. I chose the latter. The morning after that party, I packed my things. Not much, just a duffel bag of clothes, my journal, and the silver locket my grandmother had given me. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I moved to Chicago with nothing but a few $100s in my checking account and the reckless belief that I could make something of myself. The city was cold and loud, the kind of place that didn't care about scars or small-town gossip. Still, survival wasn't easy. I rented a tiny studio with peeling paint, worked late shifts as a barista, and sent out resumes until my eyes blurred. There were nights when I cried into my pillow, wondering if my parents were right, if maybe I was meant to stay hidden, scarred, small. But then I'd touch the locket at my throat and hear my grandmother's voice reminding me, "Strength does not fade." My break came in the most unexpected way. A regular at the coffee shop, a woman named Diane, noticed my sketchbook one night as I doodled designs between shifts. She owned a small interior design firm and asked if I'd ever considered pursuing it professionally. I laughed, embarrassed, but she didn't. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've got talent, Emily. Don't waste it hiding behind fear. Diane became my mentor, guiding me through the basics of design, introducing me to clients, and teaching me how to run a business. At first, I stumbled through every step, botched presentations, awkward client meetings, the terror of sending out invoices I wasn't sure anyone would pay. But slowly, the wins began to stack up. My first big client was a boutique hotel on the north side. I stayed up 3 nights in a row drafting concepts, second-guessing every line, every color palette. When they approved my design and cut me a check larger than I'd ever seen, I wept in the bathroom stall at work. That was the night I quit the coffee shop. From there, word spread. Small projects turned into bigger ones. Within 3 years, I had my own design studio, a modest space with exposed brick and sunlight streaming through tall windows. I decorated it with pieces that meant something to me. A framed copy of my grandmother's handwritten recipe card, a thrifted lamp I'd restored, plants that somehow survived despite my black thumb. But here's the part no one knew. I never told my family. To them, I was still getting by, maybe working an office job, nothing impressive. I kept my social media vague, never posting about new contracts or my growing client list. Some secrets, I decided, were better kept.
Why?
Because success tasted sweeter when it was mine alone, uncontaminated by their doubts or dismissals. I wanted to build a life so strong that if they ever saw it, they would have no choice but to recognize the woman I had become. And quietly, piece by piece, I did just that. The invitation came in the form of a phone call. My mother's voice, clipped but careful, as if she were trying on politeness for the first time in years. "Emily, we're having a family gathering next month. Madison will be in town with her kids. We'd like you to come. It's been too long. Too long." As if time alone could patch the cracks their words carved into me. I almost said no. Almost hung up. But something inside me whispered that it was time. Time for them to see who I had become. Not the girl they told to hide, but the woman who refused. So I agreed. When the day came, I didn't show up at their house. I invited them to mine. By then, I'd outgrown the modest studio in Chicago. My design firm had flourished, and I'd moved into a loft that overlooked the river, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a living space that looked like it had been torn from the glossy pages of a magazine. It wasn't just a home. It was proof of every sleepless night, every doubt conquered, every scar that refused to keep me small. The doorbell rang right on time. I opened it to see my parents, slightly older but just as polished as I remembered, with Madison trailing behind them, her children tugging at her sleeves. Their eyes widened the second they stepped inside. The silence was thick as they took it all in. The curated artwork, the custom furniture, the polished oak floors. My mother's gaze lingered on the chandelier above the dining table, her lips parting slightly. My father ran his hand along the back of a leather chair, like he needed to touch it to believe it was real. Madison's eyes darted from the gallery wall of framed project photos to the view of the river beyond the glass. "This is yours," my father finally asked, voice low, almost reverent. I let the pause stretch before answering. "Every inch." We sat in the living room, the children squirming on the couch while the adults shifted uncomfortably, as if they were guests in a world they didn't quite belong to. I poured coffee into porcelain mugs, setting them on the marble table between us. My mother cleared her throat. "Emily, we had no idea you were doing so well." I leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, the locket cool against my skin beneath the silk of my blouse. "Of course you didn't. You never asked." Madison flinched, but I wasn't finished. I stood, walking to the gallery wall, running my fingers lightly across the framed photographs, boutique hotels, restaurants, private residences. "This is my firm's work. I own it outright. Multiple locations now, in fact. Clients all over the country." Their silence was deafening. I turned back to face them. "You mocked me for my scars. You made me believe I had to hide who I was just to be acceptable. But while you were busy laughing, I was building. And now, this is who I am." My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. My mother looked away, guilt flickering across her face. Madison stared at her lap, twisting her wedding ring nervously. For the first time, the power shifted. The girl who once stood trembling at their party was gone. In her place stood a woman unshaken, unashamed, and undeniably strong. I sat back down slowly, letting the weight of my words fill the room. So, yes, this is mine. And no, I don't hide anymore. The air hung heavy after my last words, the kind of silence that made every breath sound louder than it should. My father cleared his throat, his voice brittle. Emily, we didn't mean it the way you took it. We were just joking. Joking. That word landed like another slap. I gave a small, humorless laugh and shook my head. You mocked me in front of a room full of people. That wasn't a joke, it was a choice. And it was one of many choices you made to belittle me. Madison finally looked up, her eyes glistening. I was young. I didn't think. I regret what I said that night, every single day. Please believe me. For a moment, the girl inside me, the one who had stood outside clutching her grandmother's locket, wanted to cry, to forgive instantly. But the woman I'd become new forgiveness wasn't free. It came with terms. I didn't bring you here for apologies, I said evenly. I brought you here because I needed to know if you were capable of change. If you want a place in my life, and in my success, there will be conditions. My mother stiffened, but I pressed on. First, respect. You will never again speak of my scars as if they are something to hide. They are part of me, and they are not shameful. If you can't honor that, you can't be in my home. I turned to Madison. Second, honesty. No more sharp words disguised as jokes. No more cruelty tossed around casually. You're raising children now. Teach them kindness by practicing it yourself. If you can't, I will not expose myself or them to it. Her lips trembled, and she nodded quickly. I looked back at my parents. And finally, accountability. You may never undo what you said, but you can acknowledge it. Out loud. Not just to me, but to anyone you spoke to that night. You laughed at me publicly. You will correct it publicly. My father's face flushed red, his pride battling with the weight of my demand. That's humiliating, he muttered. So was what you did to me. I replied softly, my tone unwavering. But humiliation can be the beginning of humility, if you let it. The children fidgeted, restless with the tension, but I kept my gaze steady. This is not about revenge. It's about healing. I am open to reconciliation, but only if it means creating something healthier than what we had before. The words lingered in the air like a contract waiting to be signed. For the first time in years, I saw something shift in my parents' expressions, not superiority, not disdain, but uncertainty. Maybe even respect. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. The choice is yours. But understand this. I am no longer the girl who begged for your approval. I don't need it. I have built a life full of people who value me exactly as I am. If you want to be part of that life, you'll meet me on my terms. And with that, the power was no longer theirs. It was mine. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. I didn't hear from my parents right away. Part of me wondered if I'd drawn the line too firmly, if they would choose pride over change. But then, little by little, the signs appeared. My mother sent an email, short, awkward, but honest. She wrote that she had told several family friends about the mistake she and my father had made years ago, and that she would continue to. It wasn't poetic, but it was a start. Madison called next. Her voice shook as she apologized, not with excuses this time, but with sincerity. I want my kids to grow up knowing their aunt is strong and beautiful, she said. I want them to learn that scars tell stories worth honoring. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than I ever thought I'd hear. When I invited them back weeks later, it was different. My parents' posture had shifted, less rigid, more tentative. Madison arrived with her children, who ran through my loft giggling, their laughter filling spaces that once felt empty. At dinner, no one avoided the subject of my scars. Instead, Madison leaned over and said softly, I hope one day you'll tell them how you got them. They should know what strength looks like. That night, when the dishes were cleared and the city lights glowed outside my window, I stood by myself for a moment, my hand brushing against the silver locket at my throat. My grandmother's words echoed in my memory. Beauty fades. Strength does not. I realized then that the scars I once covered were no longer a source of shame. They were proof of survival, of resilience, of a journey I had carved for myself when no one believed I could. For the first time, I wasn't hiding them. I wore them openly, the way I wore my success, my independence, my truth. I thought of that night years ago, the sting of laughter, the humiliation of being told to cover up. And then I thought of this moment, my family slowly learning, my own heart finally at peace. I smiled, whispering into the quiet of the room, a line that felt like both an ending and a beginning. I don't hide my scars anymore. They tell my story, and my story is mine to own.